And even on the front of like information gathering or whatever the fuck the dumbass lawyers, the dumbass Chevron lawyers have like brought forward in the Ecuador lawsuit, okay? Don't get suckered into believing any of that shit, okay? Yeah, don't be a rule lover, be a rule disagreeer, especially when the rules are created by those who, you know, care more about corporate profit than the safety and security of the people that they're fucking over, especially when those people are indigenous people. Now, I hope some of you libs that listen to me all day, every day, understand why I despise the American government, okay? Like, this is just a fraction of the evil that we commit, justify, advocate for, continue on a fucking daily basis, okay? Just a fraction. Just a fucking fraction. I know it's easy to say, all you say, Hasan, is America bad. All you say, Hasan, is America bad. Well, there's a reason for why I say that, okay? This is one of those reasons. World's worst.
I always remember a story Umberto talks about a lot of how when he was a little kid, there's an enormous river in front of the village where he lives in the forest, and one day it just became absolutely riven with black oil.
Sick.
When you see the river on fire that your people have depended on for 1,000 years because of oil contamination, you see your life and your future go up in flames.
What some environmentalists call the world's worst oil-related disaster.
My name is Steven Donziger. I was there in Ecuador when indigenous groups and Amazon communities were fighting Chevron in an epic battle for justice. My first trip to Ecuador was in April of 1993. I went down with some lawyers and scientists to investigate reports that Texaco had dumped literally billions of gallons of toxic oil waste into the pristine Amazon rainforest where indigenous groups live. No one really knew what would happen as a result of the trip, but one thing that did happen is those who went on it all committed to trying to do something to address the problem and to help the people, and to hold Texaco, now Chevron, accountable for what looked like a massive human rights problem that was done deliberately. On my first trip, I was shocked by what we found. I expected to see pollution. I was shocked by the extent of it. Massive pools of oil, literally thousands of them all over the rainforest. The oil was on their clothes, it was in the air they breathed, it was in the food they ate, it was in the water that they drank. It was an apocalyptic nightmare. When you drill an oil well, you go thousands of feet underground, and all this rock and heavy metals and man-made chemicals that cause cancer come up out of the ground with the oil, and you have to put it somewhere, and they just put it in unlined pits in the jungle. In many of the pits, they built pipes on the sides to take the overflow into the nearby rivers and streams where people were using for their drinking water without telling the people that they were doing this.
Texaco utilizó la tecnología más barata con tal de tener mayores ganancias como recursos económicos, pero a cambio del mayor efecto ambiental y el mayor efecto en la salud de la gente.
I saw things that were unbelievably horrid.
De 20 niños que nacen, a 15, 16 niños les da esto.
People living in abject poverty because they couldn't escape the contamination.
Ahora es con mi hija, que tan guambra es mi hija y que tenga esa enfermedad como es el cáncer.
There are people there that are sick. It's a very poor region. There's absolutely no evidence that there's an increase in cancer rate.
And once
Oh, no evidence whatsoever. Thank God. Thank God we have our brilliant Chevron chief environmental scientists on the job, boys. They're just fucking poor. That's why they have extra cancer. It's because God hates them. That's what it is. It's not the petroleum that we fucking dumped into their natural water supply regularly with practices that would be completely considered unacceptable anywhere else on the planet if it wasn't like fucking random indigenous people living in huts that we were destroying the lives of.
It's a very poor region. There's absolutely no evidence that there's an increase in cancer rate.
And once you see it, and this was certainly true for me, you can't really turn your back on it. The trip changed my life. Out of that trip, we talked to people who wanted legal representation. These are all unique cultures. The Siona, the Quechua, the Kofan, the Sequoia, the Waorani all have their own languages and their own villages. Some are more farming oriented, others are more hunting, but all of them were 100% dependent on the forest for their survival. But once the oil came and poisoned this delicate ecosystem, they could no longer rely on their traditional sources of food and water. During the first 10 years of the case, we were fighting to have a jury trial in the United States. Texaco and Chevron did not want that. They were petrified of a jury. They were desperate to shift the case back to Ecuador, where they would continue with their impunity. The case ended up getting shifted to Ecuador. On the very first day of the trial in October of 2003 in Ecuador, after Chevron had agreed to accept jurisdiction there, literally the first thing they did was challenge jurisdiction.
Ooh.
They accepted jurisdiction in the United States to get it to Ecuador. Then we got there and they're like, oh, you don't have jurisdiction over us. And that began years and years of completely bad faith, in my mind, unethical litigation tactics. Chevron's trial strategy was to sabotage the trial.
Nosotros no manipulamos. Nosotros fuimos los que
We don't manipulate. Diego Larrea, a lawyer for Chevron, is saying, we are the ones who asked to come to Ecuador to be judged. This is fresh crude. That's manipulation.
Chevron did not want any litigation on the merits of the claims of the Ecuadorians. They wanted to avoid that at all costs. They paid one of their employees, Diego Borja, to try to entrap a judge in a bribery scandal. He taped it through a pen.
Yeah. This is all the Chevron Texaco case.
Bro, you know, judges are always in the pocket of big indigenous populations riddled with fucking cancer from petroleum dumps. You know, I'm always saying this. Big indigenous, dude. Oh, fuck. They're really destroying they're destroying the sanctity and security of our beautiful court system.
You've read all of this?
Ya leído todo usted.
They were constantly filing dozens and dozens of trial motions in like a very short period of time, like an hour, to stop the court from functioning properly.
Es un abogado corrupto de Texaco.
Señor, usted va a responder por sus palabras.
Yo estoy respondiendo, señor. Usted es un abogado corrupto.
Chevron would then file more motions to recuse the judge from the case. And that motion would then go to another judge and it would delay the trial for 6 months.
Part of Texaco's strategy is to bankrupt us.
So Chevron has gone out of its way to avoid.
For the record, that's just how it works, okay? Arbitration almost always fucking ends in favor of the corporation, right? Internally. That's why a lot of your contracts have that clause that you have to do like internal arbitration within the corporation. But if it doesn't, and if it actually escapes, okay, if it somehow gets to a point where you have someone like Steven Donziger here who's just like gonna fucking go brazy, okay, and continue to fight back, then they will engage in the war of attrition. And they will always have enough fucking enough funds to continue the war of attrition. But in this situation, he was able to successfully sue them and win $9.5 billion, which has not been paid yet. So there's that.
Talking about the real issue, which is that it committed environmental crimes in Ecuador that have devastated indigenous groups, devastated farming communities, poisoned this incredibly important ecosystem that's critical to the survival of the planet for all of us. They don't want to talk about that. Why? Because it will undermine their business model. Chevron and other fossil fuel companies like to go into areas, take out the oil, get all the profits they can, and leave behind massive pollution that the public or the area communities have to pay. They report these enormous profits, but we, meaning the people, are actually subsidizing them because we're paying the cost for their pollution while they get the profits. So the case in Ecuador ended on February 14th, 2011, with a resounding victory for the affected communities. But up to this point, even though the people in Ecuador won the case, they've yet to receive the first dollar of their judgment.
Vimos la dramática presentación ahí, en que todo el mundo ya asumió que ese material que salía era petróleo y tenía la marca Texaco. Yo no observé ninguna marca.
Chevron knows if the people of Ecuador who've won this judgment,
it got there. Actually, this is a naturally growing barrel of oil. Okay,
the floodgates will open, and there will be potentially $1 trillion+ of liability, because what they did in Ecuador, they've done in dozens of countries around the world.
We're going to fight this until hell freezes over, and then we'll fight it out of the ice.
We're not denying that.
Todo esto es petróleo. Mira.
But those environmental problems are the responsibility of the Ecuadorian state. We did our part. Texaco did its part.
For someone to...
Yeah, it's the fault of the Ecuadorian EPA, which we have a direct line of communication with, and don't really give a shit even if they had any sort of like environmental protection regulation, because we're killing poor people, indigenous people. They don't have access to the same level, same communication processes that like the American citizens do, for example. But even then, we fuck over indigenous people here in America. They have access to the internet, but nobody gives a shit. Corporate media will never cover this sort of shit, or will very rarely ever fucking offer just a baby bit of time to it. Okay. It's awesome.
To say
it's not their fault. They were just following the rule of the law.
That we just push dirt on the spits. It's absolutely untrue.
They basically have concluded that it's cheaper to pay hundreds of lawyers to fight this than to pay the people they harmed. Because once that happens once, the chances of it happening dozens more times increase dramatically, and their whole business model gets destroyed. It is a business model based on privatizing profits and socializing costs to the most vulnerable people on the planet. This case is about challenging that, ending it, holding it accountable. Which is why they are spending massive sums of money to try to destroy my life and hold me up as some sort of scalp that they can put on the walls of their homes like hunters put a moose head up. That's really what they want out of me.
In August 2019, in connection to a lawsuit Chevron filed against Stephen in 2011, Stephen was charged with criminal contempt of court and put under house arrest.
Human rights lawyer, detained in the United States of America on bogus charges to help a U.S. company evade a $10 billion environmental liability owed to the most vulnerable indigenous groups in the Amazon. So what's the point of this other than to punish me for my successful human rights advocacy for the people of Ecuador? Their entire strategy now is to sue anyone who wants to help the case.
For the record, he didn't even break the fucking rules. Like, in this situation, they actually took it to criminal court, and they were like, no, that's ridiculous. We're not going to prosecute him. So then they found a fucking positive judge that would destroy his life in civil court. He's not actually he's not in prison for anything other than you are getting sued. What? Radical moral internist? Shut the fuck up. They literally hired a judge, basically, to charge him, to hold him in contempt of court, in criminal contempt of court, and just basically sideline the criminal justice system. It is insane. Okay.
Including the lawyers, including me. You know, I think there's a larger lesson to be learned from this experience. If we let the fossil fuel industry continue along its path, we will no longer have a planet. And, you know, you can look at this as, oh, there's this pollution and they sued and there's all this litigation. Or you can look at it as the first step of a new way of thinking. The idea that you can leverage resources such that communities understand that they have the power to form alliances around the world to hold the perpetrators of these environmental crimes and human rights violations fully accountable, such that they stop doing it. We will have a better world. And like, it's important not to get distracted by what's happening to any one individual, in this case me, because I'm in a difficult situation. It's important to understand that and to help me and to protect me and others like me. But we cannot preserve our planet for our children, for our grandchildren, for future generations unless this work is done.
All right, so that's Steven Donziger, who I am about to have on right now, right this very moment. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you just watched the video that we just watched, the world's worst oil-related disaster you've never heard of, and Steven Donziger. You are still currently, after basically for 2 years, as a human rights lawyer, you've served a unjustifiable criminal contempt of court house arrest, and you are still under house arrest right now, right? I believe that they had like taken you off of house arrest and actually sent you to prison. Now you're back. Serving that sentence.
That's correct. I've been under house arrest now for almost 1,000 days for something that no other lawyer has ever spent a day under detention for in the history of our country. But yeah, I spent 45 days in federal prison. Another 900 and I've kind of lost count, 30 or 40 in house arrest here in my apartment in Manhattan.
So can you walk everyone through, I mean, a lot of people are aware of your situation, but can you walk us through exactly what crime you committed to get to this situation?
Sure. First, I didn't commit a crime, but my so-called crime in the eyes of Chevron and the fossil fuel industry was, as a human rights lawyer, I think I was a little too successful representing my indigenous and clients down in the Amazon of Ecuador. We fought for years, myself and other lawyers from Ecuador, in the courts down there to win a historic judgment in the amount of $9.5 billion against Chevron. And Chevron tried to criminalize me. They didn't want to pay the judgment. They vowed to fight it until hell froze over and then fight it on the ice. That was the words of their top lawyer. And then they concocted this scheme with the cooperation of 2 federal judges here in New York to basically detain me for protecting the interests of my clients. So, the pretextual crime was that I didn't turn over my computer on court order to Chevron. Instead, I appealed the order. And while it was pending appeal, I believe the order was unlawful. While that unlawful order was being appealed, the judge who issued it claimed I committed a crime by not following the order I was appealing. And none of it made any sense. It was clearly an attempt to retaliate against me and my indigenous clients in Ecuador for holding Chevron to account for its massive oil pollution in the rainforest.
Yeah. Also, there's a little bit of drama leading up to this court case to begin with, right? I mean, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, originally there was attempts to criminally prosecute you. which of course no one was willing to take because it's a ridiculous. It would have been a ridiculous court case for the criminal justice system to take on. So there was basically a sidelining of that and the hiring of a judge to try you in civil court.
That's true, and that's an extremely important point. I've never been prosecuted criminally or charged with a crime by a normal prosecutorial entity that is, a government prosecutor's office. The only people who have accused me of a crime are the people at Chevron who I helped defeat in court in a crushing historic victory down in Ecuador, and they claim that I committed fraud and they paid a witness to claim, I did some bad things, totally false. And they, took that into a U.S. judge who's a former tobacco lawyer. His name was Lewis Kaplan. And he just, tried to steamroll me without a jury. And then after that, he tried to get me prosecuted for refusing to turn my computer over to Chevron, which is preposterous order. It would be unethical for me to do so. That case, the U.S. Attorney's Office refused to take it, so the judge appointed a private Chevron law firm to prosecute me directly. And I have to say, of all the things that have happened to me, there's so many irregular things. This, I think, is the most terrifying. I was basically prosecuted and deprived of my liberty by a Chevron lawyer in the name of the U.S. government. That's never happened before in our history.
Yeah, and if this can happen to you, this can happen to technically anyone that is an attorney that's on the side of justice or fighting for civil rights, civil liberties. Anyone that goes against a mega corporation. This is basically establishing a template for how you can continuously sue people and even jail them unjustifiably. What would you say is one of the reasons? I mean, what would you say to the lack of mainstream media coverage in this process? Do you feel like it's been adequate? Do you feel like people have talked about this at all? I mean, I originally knew about this specifically from the Chapo interviews. Like I personally was, and Democracy Now! As well. So I personally have only heard about your case, despite it being completely unjustifiable and a stain on the supposedly infallible American criminal justice system, the institutions. I've only heard about it from independent media outlets. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, as you know, I'm sure better than most, it's hard to get big media to cover certain topics in America. When indigenous people beat the heck out of a big American oil company in a foreign court, they're just not covering it. I can't explain it. I mean, we have personally pitched 7 different reporters at the New York Times, and every single one was interested. And then, they'd kick it upstairs, and the story would be killed, including one extremely well-known writer who worked 2 weeks on a story for the magazine before it was killed. I mean, I will point out that Chevron's, the lead lawyer of the New York Times on media affairs is the same lawyer at the Gibson Dunn law firm paid by Chevron to detain me. So there's a total conflict of interest at the newspaper. But of course, that doesn't explain the power of the fossil fuel industry and their ad dollars to control news coverage at some of the main networks like CNN or MSNBC, which also really haven't covered this. But to the credit of the independent media, people like yourself, Marianne Williamson, Katie Halper, Crystal Ball, I mean, there's so many people, Will Menaker, the Chapo guys, have covered this, and they really have spread the word such that our narrative has gotten out there in a very big way, and it's reached millions and millions of people. So you don't need those big media companies anymore to get your story out like you did prior to the internet. So I'm appreciative to you and others who really create these platforms where people like me can actually tell our stories.
Yeah. Amnesty International has talked about this before as well, with the over 100 environmental and human rights organizations joining Amnesty International's call for Biden to pardon you.
Yeah.
I don't even fully understand how that works, considering that you are not, you're in criminal contempt of court, but you're not being charged by the American criminal justice system. So I don't even know what kind of federal jurisdiction that falls under.
Well, just so you know, I mean, it's so weird to ask for a pardon when you didn't do anything. Okay,
Yeah.
so I want to start by saying that. But what we have figured out on our team or have decided is that the judges here, at least in New York, who have control of my case, are, completely pro Chevron. I mean, I feel like I cannot get a fair hearing. I've never had a jury. I've never been charged criminally yet. I'm detained now for almost 1,000 days on a misdemeanor. I mean, the whole thing is crazy. So we asked Merrick Garland, who's the attorney general, to take the case out of the hands of the private Chevron law firm and prosecute me directly. That is, if there's something really there, let's do a normal prosecution. And he has refused to do that, which really is disturbing. So we're like, let's just go to Biden and force the issue with Biden because, he claims he's dealing with the climate issue. Well, you can't deal with the climate issue adequately when a human rights lawyer who's a frontline Earth defender is being locked up in your own country. So we're pushing Biden to issue a pardon and end this charade once and for all. Amnesty International has gotten the support of 120 different human rights and environmental organizations.
I just lost
Oh, yeah.
you. I just lost your audio for a second. You said we're pushing Biden to end the charade once and for all.
Yeah, and then I was saying that 120 different human rights and environmental organizations have joined Amnesty International's call for a pardon. Biden needs to step up and fix this problem because clearly the judges in New York, won't adjudicate the case in any kind of normal and fair way. So we are asking the President Biden to deal with this, and we are building support. By the way, we're asking everyone to sign the pardon letter, which was signed by 10 attorneys, and you can do that on our website at freedonziger.com.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned Biden potentially stepping in. However, also, as you have talked about before, more than 200 justice groups are rejecting the Biden nominee and Chevron lawyer Jennifer Reardon as a lifetime federal judge. Reardon was one of the lawyers that helped Chevron jail you and cover up its toxic poisoning of the Amazon. So it does seem like their interests lie elsewhere in defending the corporate structure.
Well, I want people to really sort of think about how bad this is for a second. Okay, the lawyer you just mentioned, Jennifer Reardon, is a Chevron lawyer at a private law firm that financed the criminal prosecution of me. Why is she being nominated by Joe Biden to the federal bench? Not only to the bench, but to the very same court where Judge Kaplan sits. Judge Kaplan and Judge Preska locked me up. They've kept me locked at the behest of Chevron and its law firm Gibson Dunn. So now we're going to have another judge on the same court from the Gibson Dunn law firm. It's kind of funny. You never really see human rights lawyers become judges. There always seem to be these corporate defense lawyers. And, my opinion, they rigged the system against human rights victims like those in Ecuador, especially when they come into U.S. court. So, I think it's wrong. I think it's outrageous, actually, for the United States Senate, for the Democrats, for Biden to be pushing onto the federal bench someone who has represented Chevron, attacked the Amazon, helped Chevron destroy the Amazon, attacked indigenous peoples, and jailed me. That person just is unfit to serve as a federal judge, in my opinion.
No, absolutely. Do you think so? How much money has been paid to the victims thus far out of the $9.5 billion that was successfully sued that you successfully sued this company for?
Zero.
So not a single dollar has been paid off so far.
Chevron planted some trees in the median of a highway in Ecuador's capital of Quito. That's about all they've done. They have never paid the judgment. They have not only not paid it, they vowed to never pay it. They forced the indigenous peoples to chase their assets around the world, and they just mocked them. I mean, they also have paid, this is very important, they paid a couple of $2 billion at least in fees to pay 60 law firms and 2,000 lawyers to attack me and to attack other lawyers who held them accountable through this case. So they're paying money, even big money. They're just paying it to law firms to beat the hell out of the indigenous peoples rather than to comply with the court order that they clean up their poison in the Amazon.
Have they cleaned up that poison in the Amazon at all, or have they made any efforts to even clean that up?
No. I mean, they claim they have. They have these open air waste pits, and I want people to understand that. I guess people saw the Vice video, but There's 1,000 of those waste pits that they dug out of the jungle floor, didn't line them. They put pits into the sides to run the cancer-causing waste into rivers and streams that people were drinking out of, causing a massive epidemic of cancer. I mean, hundreds, thousands of people have cancer. Many have died. And they just left it there. And then in the 1990s, after we initially sued them, they covered a few of the pits up with dirt to hide them, as if that was some form of cleanup. And what it really did is it made the problem worse. It's sort of like treating cancer with a Band-Aid, and it just doesn't come close to fixing the problem. And there's 1,000 pits down there that were built by Texaco, now Chevron, in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, that are still polluting the jungle, still polluting the groundwater. They still have the pipes running into rivers and streams, and they're poisoning people. And I'll point out one important thing here. Like, this was not an accident, okay? This was not an oil catastrophe that was a result of two ships colliding or a blowout that occurred in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. Oh, no. This was planned, okay? This was a deliberate engineering design to run billions of gallons of cancer-causing oil waste into the rainforest, onto the ancestral lands of indigenous peoples as a cost-saving measure by Chevron. I mean, it's just so wrong, and I would argue it's criminal.
Absolutely. I mean, it literally is criminal.
Yeah.
But of course, obviously, they have enough power to not only not go to jail for these sorts of crimes against humanity, but also they can even refuse to pay. They can even refuse to pay the victims and not even clean it up. So, what kind of recourse is out there? What kind of international mechanisms are out there to potentially force Chevron's hand into paying the victims the dollar amount that they won rightfully in court?
Well, luckily for the Ecuadorians, there's a lot of avenues where they can force Chevron to pay. I mean, part of our issue is resources, and part of it is they detained me, and I was sort of the driving force behind a lot of these efforts, and I haven't been able to travel. They took my passport, by the way. And I've been stuck here now for almost 3 years. But basically, the communities in Ecuador that won the judgment have the right to go collect the judgment forcibly by suing Chevron wherever they have assets in any country in the world. Chevron has assets in dozens and dozens of countries around the world. I mean, it's a very wealthy company. And there are lawyers, as I understand it, helping the Ecuadorians decide where they're going to file enforcement actions in other countries to, if necessary, seize the company's assets such that they're forced to comply with the court order that they clean up their toxic waste that they left down in Ecuador. So it's really these judgment enforcement mechanisms in the courts of countries where Chevron has assets is the easiest and most effective way to force Chevron to pay up. I've been ordered, by the way, by Judge Kaplan to not participate in any of those activities, and I'm not because of that order. But the Ecuadorians and council have a right to advocate for themselves. And my understanding is they plan to do just that.
Do you feel like your current predicament, being unjustifiably held in contempt of court for 1,000 days in house arrest, do you feel like this is a way to stop other lawyers such as yourself, just like yourself, from going out and fighting for indigenous people? Do you feel like this is a threatening posture deliberately created, the situation, the scenario deliberately created to showcase that, like, hey, look, if you go against us, it doesn't matter if you are in the right, we will fuck up your life permanently?
Absolutely. I think Chevron is trying to turn me into a vehicle to intimidate other lawyers and human rights activists and environmental justice campaigners all over the world. I mean, they want me to be Exhibit A when young people think, well, do I want to go into this field? Do I want to do the hard work to defend the earth, to defend our planet, to save our planet from global warming? Well, look what happened to Stephen Donziger. But what I really try to emphasize, and I think this is really, really important, is this is happening because have been successful. Okay, we won the case. They didn't win. We won. And the judgment in Ecuador is invalidated by 6 different appellate courts, including the Supreme Courts of Ecuador and Canada. There's only one trial judge in the US who has tried to undermine the judgment, this Judge Kaplan, by attacking me and depriving the Ecuadorians of their lead lawyer. He's really trying to get me to quit the case, such that the Chevron's victims will be defenseless and will be unable to continue to pursue their legal claims. So, I don't want people to get demoralized. Yes, they're trying to intimidate others through my example. But you know what? Look at my example. There's a way people can get inspired to do the work by seeing how successful you can be at a grand scale, such that you can really change the paradigm of an entire industry. I mean, understand this case is intimately connected to the destruction of the planet, to global warming. Like, if you can't do legal work to hold the major polluters accountable, what chance do we really have of saving our planet from this crisis? So I see the fact they're locking me up, and the naked and what I would argue are corrupt means that they're doing so is proof positive that we're successful and that they feel tremendous fear. They're terrified, actually, of people like me and others who do this work. Otherwise, why would they have to resort to such measures? But
Yeah.
the story is still being written, and we'll see how it ends up. We won. I feel fabulous about the future. By the way, my sentence ends on the 25th of April, which is less than 3 weeks, and we'll see where we go from there. I'm not the only lawyer working on the case. There's tons of other lawyers. It's not my case. I don't own the case. It's owned by the people of Ecuador, and they have a lot of legal representation. And Chevron's in for a real battle. They're facing major financial risk.
What are the next steps after this? After your, criminal contempt of court is done, your sentence is over. Even though it's so weird saying that it's a sentence or criminal contempt of court.
I know.
It's a ridiculous situation.
I know. Sorry for that noise. What I was going to say is that the next thing is I'm going to still really do 2 parallel tracks. I mean, one is I'm going to fight for my exoneration. Like, I don't want them to get away with this. So that includes an appeal, which is still pending, of my so-called conviction, by the way, by Judge Preska, who's a member of the Federalist Society. That was my judge. Chevron funds the Federalist Society.
Oh, yeah.
And she was reading the newspaper during witness testimony, denied me a jury, and denied me the right to present a defense. I mean, the whole trial was a joke. It was a farce.
They
So
can't
we'll
add
see.
additional, right? Sorry to cut you off, but they can't. Can they continue adding additional, like extend the date of the criminal contempt of court here, or?
Well, no. I mean, once my sentence ends, that's over, but it won't prevent them from trying to go after me in other ways. I hope they don't. I mean, if they do, I will fight it. And the other thing is the pardon. I mean, President Biden and Merrick Garland, the Attorney General of the United States, need to stop this, the first private corporate prosecution in U.S. history. It violates the rule of law. Why would Merrick Garland, who's supposedly this person who's independent and upholds the law, restoring independence to the Department of Justice, why would he be that person while at the same time letting Chevron prosecute its lead critic in a so-called criminal prosecution in the name of the U.S. government? I mean, this is an embarrassment for our country. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has already determined my detention is illegal. And they've ordered my immediate release. So this is becoming more and more of an embarrassment for Biden and his foreign policy. So, we're hoping to get through the courts. I don't have a ton of confidence because the courts have so favored Chevron and really haven't given me anything close to a fair hearing up to this point in the United States. But we're still hoping to get relief because this is so egregious, it's so flagrant. And then also a pardon from Biden. And then apart from that, I plan to do a lot of human rights work generally around the world. I've been asked to talk about lots of different issues beyond Ecuador, and I plan to continue my human rights work.
One of the details that you also mentioned that I think is good for people to know is that Judge Kaplan allowed Chevron to present secret and anonymous witnesses who could not effectively be cross-examined due to the purported security threats, according to the report. Just like they said originally that, there was judges in the pocket of the big indigenous, as though like there is some sort of coalition there with any sort of security or money. And then also that Judge K, in addition, allowed Chevron to present a witness who conceded that the company was paying him a monthly stipend 20 times his former salary. So one of the witnesses, secret witnesses, literally got paid a monthly stipend 20 times more than their former salary. I wonder if the corrupt side in the circumstances, those who are fighting for the indigenous population and their safety and security, or the mega corporation backed judges that have allowed these incredible erosions of the law to occur here.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, Chevron's star witness against me, who just baldly lied in court, they paid him $2 million plus total. They moved him and his family up from Ecuador. He claimed he was in a meeting where he saw me approve the offering of a bribe to the trial judge. It's just total bullshit. I mean, it just did not happen. And there was no evidence to support what he said. Zero evidence. And he later admitted lying in a under oath in a separate arbitration proceeding like a year later. But Judge Kaplan continues to insist that this is a valid judicial finding, and on that basis, I was disbarred without a hearing on the theory that I bribed a judge. By the way, if I really bribed a judge, indict me criminally and try me, okay? I'm telling that to the U.S. attorney. But of course, Chevron tried to get that to happen, and they wouldn't do it because there's no evidence. So why is Chevron always using these tricks and maneuvers through civil court to try to criminalize me? And they'll only take their case to one judge who's a former tobacco lawyer who obviously has deep hostility toward me. I mean, it's really an embarrassment, and it's becoming increasingly obvious to everyone around the world. And the United Nations Working Group, by the way, that's 5 respected jurists that looked at the record in this criminal contempt case, said they were appalled. That's the word they used, appalled by this staggering, another word they used, staggering level of judicial impropriety in my case. And these are U.S. federal judges. So, look, we have a more serious problem in this country, which is a lot of our federal judges have gone to the extreme right-wing edge of the political spectrum. Under Trump, that process of getting those types of judges onto the federal bench was deeply accelerated. It's amazing how people like Trump appoint extreme right-wing judges, people like Biden and Obama appoint centrist judges, and they act like it's some sort of balance, but the courts are increasingly dominated by pro-corporate judges. It's very hard to get a fair hearing when you're a human rights lawyer at this point. And I've been victimized by this trend, although I will say, the vast majority of judges in America, even if they're right-wing, at least try to adhere to the rule of law to the best of their ability. These two judges, I think, went totally over the edge to try to manipulate the law to destroy the life of a human rights lawyer, and that's different.
Yeah, and I mean, a reminder to those in the chat who are watching right now that this is the very same Supreme Court that also threw out a lawsuit accusing Cargill Inc. and Nestle, a subsidiary, of knowingly helping perpetuate slavery at the Ivory Coast cocoa farms, which they absolutely did. Because they were basically third-party vendors that were utilizing child slavery at the cocoa farms, so they were not morally culpable or accountable for that. I mean, I'm describing it in like really reductive terms. I don't know if you want to put any sort of feedback towards that, but
that's a great example of how our courts are just completely hostile to human rights claims of people from other countries who are victimized by U.S. companies. I mean, it's just the most extraordinary thing. It's like U.S. companies are being given immunity, essentially immunity, to go to other countries and kick the shit out of people and never be held legally accountable because they create these doctrines about, hey, you have to have contact with the U.S. to sue, even though, like in the case of Ecuador, all the planning to poison the Amazon was done in the United States at Texaco headquarters here in New York. But oh no, it's not close enough to Ecuador to do the case here. There's always these mechanisms that judges have to get rid of these claims, and they try to act like they're applying these rules. But in reality, it's very subjective, and it's driven, I think, largely by politics and by the need by our court system to protect the wealth of corporations, U.S. corporations that really commit serious abuses in other countries, as Chevron has done in Ecuador, and by the way, in many other countries as well.
Yeah. I mean, this is before we even get into. I mean, there's also other things that they keep doing, like I don't know, utilizing the State Department to create conflict in areas, or even when they have nationalization of oil refineries or oil industries or extraction industries in general. It's a great opportunity for a right wing coup d'état to immediately take over the country, even if it fails. Obviously,
Yeah, I mean, my experience is Chevron and a lot of these big oil companies prefer an environment where governments are corrupt. It becomes more efficient. Governments are willing to deploy the army to shoot their people when they protest pollution. Governments who will take payoffs to give them, no bid contracts. I mean, they like that. It makes it easier and more efficient than to actually play by real rules. And I'll also add that in my experience in Ecuador, and I've been there, by the way, over 250 times, the US State Department, via our embassy in Quito, was like an outpost for Chevron. I mean, Chevron would just float in there and get them to try to pressure the Ecuador government to kill our case. Chevron had easy access to the ambassador whenever they wanted it. They tried to make the fact that Ecuadorians were suing a U.S. company some sort of foreign policy problem for the U.S. government, where they would put it on the agenda for their bilateral trade talks. I mean, it was awful the way big oil had the power to essentially, shoehorn U.S. foreign policy in such a way that it would serve their needs, their private needs, rather than promoting democracy, rule of law, and human rights, which is the professed purpose of U.S. foreign policy. Of course, we know they fall way short of that. But it was just amazing the power Chevron had to control U.S. foreign policy in Ecuador.
yeah. Let's not forget that this is also the country that has openly stated in its own, in its own with its own legislation that they will quite literally invade The Hague if any sort of U.S. service member is ever prosecuted or extradited to be tried in the International Criminal Court for any kind of war crimes that they may have engaged in. So that's how we think here in the United States about the international rule of law, or any number of different treaties or whatever we have, suggestions, conventions. They're all just they're nothing. We are the global hegemonic dominant power, and our government unfortunately works at the behest of the corporations and the corporate profit, rather than places the emphasis on the security of human beings all around the world. Stephen, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I wanted to hear more about what you're looking forward to in the future now that you're going to be a free man soon, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Well, this has been quite the ordeal. I mean, I literally have been in my house now for almost 1,000 days, unable to even go out to dinner, travel. I get out on occasion with passes to do like legal meetings or, very limited doctor's appointments, but pretty much here all the time. So look, I'm looking forward to resting for a few months. I want to write this story in the form of a book, and reflect on what's happened. I really feel empowered, oddly enough, by having been detained. I mean, the support that I and my clients down in Ecuador received just was something I didn't expect to happen to the extent that it did. I mean, we have 68 Nobel laureates who've issued statements, dozens of bar associations around the world, 11 congresspersons, thousands and thousands of citizens have joined our campaign. By the way, for those who want to help, please go to freedonziger.com website.
Yeah, we'll be spamming that. I think originally they might have broken the website a little bit when you first mentioned it. Yeah, there's a lot of people in here watching. Oh no, it's working now.
Okay, and by the way, we have a donate button. I don't really like pitching for money, but if people can even give a little bit, we have massive legal costs to deal with these monsters. So, we have thousands. The way we make this work, because it costs a lot of money to deal with Chevron. Look, we pay a penny on the dollar compared to what they pay, but we need money, and we rely on thousands of people around the world to give small amounts of money. It's sort of the Bernie Sanders fundraising model.
Yeah.
And so if you can If you can give a little, please do. If you can't, don't worry about it. Give us your email anyway, and you'll get updates on the case. Again, it's freedonziger.com. But what we're trying to do writ large is take this movement for my freedom and for justice for the people of Ecuador and build it into something bigger, really build it into a campaign for global justice through human rights, law, and climate. I mean, these types of cases are so important to all of us. And, a lot of people don't know how much power judges have to block lawyers from doing the important frontline earth defense work. People like me, people like Pablo Fajardo, who's an Ecuadorian lawyer, Julio Prieto, and others. We need to be able to do this work. There's a lot of people trying to do the work around the world, and we cannot live in a society, if we're to save our planet, where any government, particularly a government that professes to support the rule of law, like the United States, is able to lock up its human rights lawyers. I mean, we can't let this happen again. So help us. I mean, our campaign is to hold corporate polluters accountable and to prevent advocates from being attacked and jailed like this, such that this work can get done. So again, it's freedonziger.com. And I'll say I'm really optimistic about the future. I mean, people are like, you're crazy. Like, you have the optimism virus. I mean, I understand how history and social change evolves dialectically, right? Like, you're successful, they're going to push back. You get to a higher level, then they push back harder. And, we've been able to elevate this whole battle to a place where we never imagined it could ever get to when we started many, many years ago. So, we're going to get it even higher. More people are going to know about it, and we're going to strengthen the hands of all citizens to do this work such that we can really gain control of our planet, or at least try to, over this very powerful fossil fuel industry.
Absolutely. I'm not usually a very optimistic person, but talking to you, I get a little bit more confidence in that on that front. What other calls to action do you have for the people here right now, other than donations, which are valuable, of course, at freedonziger.com? You also have calling, for example, Merrick Garland's office, Attorney General Garland's office, and pressing option 2. Demand U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland and the DOJ end the nation's first corporate prosecution. Is there anything else that's important for us to focus our efforts on?
Absolutely. So there's, support the campaign, call Merrick Garland, sign on to our pardon letter to Biden. We have, I don't know, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 signatures. We'd like to get that up much higher. So on the Free Donziger website, there's a button, you can say sign the letter. So please sign the letter. We want to keep getting that letter stronger and stronger, and we're just going to keep pushing it. I mean, there's no statute of limitations. I mean, my sentence is going to end on April 25th. Beyond that, we're going to keep fighting for this if it takes years. I mean, this is going to be an organizing vehicle as well for the movement. And the final thing I'd like to add is, my sentence ends April 25th. For those who live in New York City area, come by to 104th Street between West End and Broadway. A bunch of musicians are going to come that afternoon at 4 o'clock. We're going to have a little music festival to celebrate the end of my sentence and to talk about the future. So everyone's invited. It's 104th Street, Manhattan, between West End and Broadway, 4 o'clock on April 25th. We have a permit. We're going to try to have some fun.
Hell yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for all of the wonderful work that you've done, all the brave work that you've done. And thank you for coming on to explain your plight, the plight of the people that you've defended and fought for. This was awesome.
Thank you for having me, and I salute you for what you do. And
no, I'm nothing. I'm just a shit poster, man. I don't do anything.
Bring a lot of issues that are important, and from my perspective, someone who's been the big media has tried to silence me, to be able to go to people who've done the hard work to build these kinds of platforms is really important. So I salute you, my friend, for what you've done. So thank you for that.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Okay, you too.
Hey, if you like this video, please subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss out on any future videos.